All right, we now need to go on to our next session right now, and this person is actually joining us here in the studio. We are going to be practicing our social distancing here. We won't be shaking hands. We may maybe do a air high five. This person is going to be talking to us all around the HR and legal implications of the decisions that we may need to make within the next 30, 60, 90 days and beyond that could very well determine the survival of our business. So this is a really important conversation that we need to have. What I've really aimed to do for this event is to cover all of the positives that are out there, and there are lots of positives, and we've really done our best to try and lift everyone's spirits and talk about all of the opportunities that are out there for you to reinvent and reimagine and innovate your business and to go places that you never would have gone before. And I'm so excited that we've been able to achieve that already, and we've got more to come later on in our further sessions. However, we're back now. Yeah. However, we do have to cover some of the other topics as well that are critical to ensure your survival. We've already spoken about cash flow management, and that is key. So thank you so much to Brett Kelly for helping us to get on top of our finances. But now we also have to look at how we get on top of our expenses. And as we all know, as business owners, one of the biggest expenses that we have is our staff. And while we love all of our staff members, depending on the types of businesses that we have and how much you've been affected, we now have to take action in order to ensure the business's survival. Because if the business does not survive, then everybody loses. And so we really want to look at all different options. That's really what it's about. There is no judgment in terms of decisions that you feel you have to make, and we know that every single person's circumstances is different and unique. All we're going to do is present options to you, and then it's up to you to choose what is the right decisions for you. Okay, so our next guest that's here in our studio is Andrew Bland, and he runs a law firm called Bland's Law, and he is a solicitor, more than 20 years of experience, specializing in employment relations and commercial law. So what we're going to do this time, rather than a presentation with a whole bunch of slides, this is going to be an interview, and I'm going to ask Andrew a bunch of different questions that have come in from some of my clients as well, and some things that you might be thinking and feeling right now, and you want to know what your options are. So I'm going to present all of those questions to Andrew, and hopefully you're going to get really good value from this talk. Now, after that, we still have plenty more to go. We'll take a little comfort stop, and then we're going to have a fitness workout during our break, and then we're going to be back again at, I believe, 1 o'clock for the all-important afternoon session. And we've got more amazing value coming your way, including a presentation from myself, also another one from Jane Anderson coming up, Matt Alderton, and also Michael McQueen as well. So still lots more value coming your way. But right now, please give a huge round of applause to Andrew Bland. Thank you very much, everyone. Andrew, high five. All right, so welcome to our studio here. What we'd like to do now, we've got a whole bunch of questions that we'd like to put to you, but you're now at the coalface. You're speaking to business owners every day, and a lot of them are going through some really, really tough times. What is the attitude out there? What's the mood? What are people thinking, feeling? What are they asking you?
Yeah, look, it's apprehension, definitely, Dale, and people just don't know what to do. They're trying to hold the line. They're trying to do their best, by their employees where they can, but there's just so many. Well, there are options. It's hard to know what they are, and things are moving so quickly that it's difficult to sort of come down with one particular option. And so we've been speaking to a lot of people about, well, here are your options. Go away and consider them, and let us know what you want to do.
Okay, fantastic. So we are going to talk about the options that are available to people, and we know that there's businesses out there, all different shapes and sizes, and some have small teams, some have big teams, some have ones that are permanent, some have ones that are casual, part-time, lots and lots of different ones. But what are businesses' options right now around whatever we call them, sort of tools that they can use when they need them? What are some of the options that are available to business owners to get through this very tough and difficult time?
Right, so there are a number of options available, and one of them is a stand down, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, and what options there are around stand down. Not all businesses are going to be able to do the stand down, but that's certainly one that is available in this climate. Others,
can I ask a quick question around that, just so we understand the terminology? Stand down and also leave without pay. Are they the same thing, essentially, or are they different?
They're not the same thing, but they have the same effect. So, for example, a stand down, you aren't being paid, but you're in stand down, and one of the things about a stand down is that you are able to accumulate annual leave and sick leave and those sorts of things. Leave without pay, on the other hand, is one where you aren't accumulating that leave. And so the effect is similar in the sense that you're on unpaid leave, but it's a different legal sense.
Okay, and so right now there are a number of different options, and of course one option, if your business is in relatively good shape, is, and if you are unable to have your staff work from home and conduct business as usual, then having staff use up their holiday pay right now, is that something that you can actually enforce? If they have 2 weeks or 3 weeks of annual leave, can you kind of say this needs to be taken now as opposed to be using it later on down the track? Is that something we can do?
You can't enforce it, and but you can certainly give it as an option. So a lot of people are going to be out of work or sort of potentially out of work in terms of a stand down or redundancy or something like that. So one of the options that employers have is for them to access that annual leave, and a lot of people are taking up that option and will continue to do so, I think. So you can bring down your annual leave, and obviously for employers that's an advantage as well, because you're bringing down your balances, but it's also letting the employees access that annual leave. You don't have to provide all of it, but certainly it is an option. Other options, such as talking to your employees about reducing your hours or reducing your pay. So, for example, you might go to your employees and say, look, we can't afford to have you 5 days a week, but we can have you 3 days a week. So would you agree to that? Now, the important thing there is that they do need to agree, and in writing, and that's something I'd really stress, is that employers can't unilaterally make those moves in terms of reducing salary or reducing hours without the express consent of that employee. Now, we saw in the GFC over 10 years ago, that strategy was implemented very well, where employers said, well, look, we can either be made redundant or we can take a pay cut. And as long as it's understood that it's temporary, and I really can't stress enough that it needs to be agreed, and you want to put in those sorts of terms where it is a temporary solution, so people understand that when things get better, they'll be able to go back to normal. But it is a good kind of win-win, I think, for employers to adopt, in circumstances where they can.
Okay, so just to make sure we've got all our options, we can try and encourage staff to take their annual leave now, and in a way, from a business point of view, the time that I think we're going to have a very different Christmas this year, because it's almost like taking their Christmas holidays early, in a way. So that could be a smart thing for the business to do, so they don't have to have further closures later on in the year. There's the leave without pay. There's also the stand down as well that you have mentioned. So let's quickly talk about those two, and then we can also talk about reduction of hours and possibly reduction of pay. How would you implement the stand down or the leave without pay? You mentioned it has to be agreed in writing, and if that's the conclusion that someone has kind of come to, and I'm guessing it's always going to be in consultation with their accountant that really understands their numbers, then how would they even have the conversation? What do they say, and how does it work?
Yeah, so look, I think it would be useful for the viewers to understand the way in which I'd advise you go about it in sort of chronological order. Sure. So I think you want to look at your annual leave option first up, before you even get to the stand down. You want to look at, if that's not agreeable between the employee and the employer, look at reduction in pay if that's an option for you. And look at reduction in hours, the ones we've sort of talked about. Once you've exercised and those options, and if they're not agreeable, then, and those options may not be available to you anyway, but if they are available, have a look at them and try and have them that way.
So we should put them into a priority order.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Perhaps
So you're
the
dealing
stand
with,
down.
Yeah, before the stand down. The stand down is sort of seen as a, well, last resort / second last resort. We haven't talked about redundancy, but that is another option open which we can get into. But the stand down should be seen as an option after those other options have been at least considered by the employee. So what is a stand down? And that's something that is complicated, but basically it was drawn up. Section 524 of the Fair Work Act is the relevant section here. And basically what it says, and it was designed to cover things like earthquakes, cyclones, floods, those sorts of things where there was an absolute stoppage of work. But I think it's general consensus within the industry. I won't speak for everybody, but my opinion certainly is that the coronavirus is something that would fall into a situation where you could, in certain industries, exercise the stand down, because it is something that is reasonably beyond the employer's control. So that's the first part of it that you need to exercise, and I feel pretty confident in most industries, certainly things like the airlines where they've actually been shut down, and perhaps in cafes and those sorts of things where they've been shut down. That's certainly something that is beyond the employer's control.
And while we're talking about the law, there's a Fair Work Act, I believe there's been some changes that have been released in the last few days. Do they kind of build on what was done in I think it was 2009 with some of those earlier stand-down laws?
Yeah, the stand-down wasn't exercised so much in 2009, but it is. There's talk of them sort of loosening the interpretation a little bit. I'll put it that way. But just to finish the point about the standard, because it's important, because that's one of the most common questions I'm getting is, can we stand our employees down? So yes, you're ticking the box around the stoppage of work beyond your control in most cases, but then secondly, you need to be able to establish that the employee can't usefully be employed. Now, that will be different for different industries, but there's no real case law around this because it's all very new in the context of a virus such as this. But where employees cannot usefully be employed, such as maybe in a retail store or something like that,
restaurant or someone running a wedding venue,
like that, yep. Then you can exercise that stand-down clause. Now, it's important that they understand, and you should again do this by correspondence, that it's a temporary thing. It's not like a redundancy, which is final. The stand-downs are temporary, and you need to continue to review the position, I would say, on a monthly basis throughout this crisis. And hopefully, it's only going to be a sort of a 3-4 month thing, and then things will start to get back to normal. But you do need to say this is a temporary thing, and we will be reviewing this, each month and so on. So
you've already mentioned how important it is to put it in writing and make sure it's agreed by both parties.
Not agreed necessarily. You don't need to agree with the stand down. The annual leave and those reduction of hours needs to be agreed.
Right.
But the annual leave is a little bit more complicated than that. But let's specifically the reduction of hours and the reduction in pay need to be agreed in writing. But the stand down needs to be in writing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be agreed. Employers can make that decision if they fit into that criteria we've been talking about.
And just quickly on that, because I want to then talk about the other options, the reduction in hours or pay, which is of course far preferable to having people stand down, because let's kind of face it, this will eventually get through this, and you don't want to have all your people gone and maybe found other employment, because you do want to make sure that you're able to rebuild your business when there is that recovery. So the last thing you want to do is to basically release some of your people that you need for the rebuild. But so when it comes to what people want, though, is certainty. And if we're asking someone to stand down or to take whether it's a reduction in pay, how long do you actually, how long is a piece of string right now? We don't know whether it's going to be a month, 3 months, 6 months. So when you're putting this in writing, how long are you, do you put on as a time frame? And could it be variable, or does it have to be fixed? And so after that period of time, they're going to go back up to full salary and full hours. And if you're not in a position to do so, because it's agreed in writing, are you then forced into what you may have said a month or 2 months ago?
Yeah, so you again in the correspondence, you need to put an end date on it, or not necessarily an end date, but a date where it can be reviewed, right? So you might say, we're standing down employees for a period of 1 month. And then after that month, you will review it and then send another letter saying, look, we've looked at it, and we need to extend this shutdown, this stand down for another month, and then do it again another month. So you can't just sort of say, we're standing you down until further notice and then leave it at that. You need to put a date on it and then continue to review the situation, because as you say, we don't know how long this is going to last, but you certainly can't be saying we'll review it in a year or something like that. It's got to be the whole idea of a stand down is it's temporary, which is different to a redundancy. If you feel like you're shutting the doors full stop and have no intention to reopen, then that won't be a stand down. That will be more like a redundancy sort of situation. But most, I think, as you said, most businesses are looking at this as a temporary situation where they'll be able to hopefully get up and running in 3-4 months' time or whatever it is. And so this stand down is to help employees keep their jobs, but you don't have to pay them during that period.
Okay, now we'll come back and talk about redundancies kind of like later, because we all agree that's kind of like a last resort. But if we can quickly now talk a bit about the other options that we looked at, which is reduction of hours, which I think is fairly obvious for people, whether they're compacting their days down to maybe 10 to 4, for example, or they maybe doing a 3-day week instead of a 5-day week.
Or a job share or something like that.
Or a job share, which is another great option as well. I think that's pretty clear. But doing the other one about working full-time but at a reduced pay, how do you even have that conversation, and where do you actually even set it? Because any kind of reduction is gonna hurt people and seen as unkind. But if you're really trying to keep your business afloat, you may have to cut really hard depending on how badly your business is affected, and it would seem really harsh to expect someone to take a 50% pay cut, but if that's what you need to survive, how do you even have that conversation with your staff? And if you coach some of your clients to go, what do you say?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tough one, because it's all about having, in this circumstance, an honest conversation. And you really need to, I think, sit down with those employees early on and say, look, you know what's going on, these are tough times. I'm doing my best to keep the doors open, but I'm just letting you know that as it currently is, we're going to need to, there's a number of options available to us, and you can go through those options and say, we don't want to take those options of redundancy and stand down. We may need to in the future, and I think you really do need to be clear with them that we don't know what's going to happen here. And they'll, my experience is that they will understand that to an extent. They'll be disappointed maybe, but they'll understand it. But as long as you're being honest about it and open about it, and keeping the communication channels open, then that's going to, I think, reassure employees to the extent that they can be reassured that you're doing your best to look after them. And so telling them, look, here are some options which we really don't want to do until we need to, if we need to, but the bottom line is we're struggling for cash flow is tight, and we really need to reduce your pay. And we're feeling the pain as employers, and frankly, we'd like to share the pain around as opposed to putting all the pain on you where you just straight flat lose your job. And we're going to need to, at the moment, we still need you, but we just can't afford you at that rate. And so we want to reduce your pay. And can you have a think about it? If there's any other options, perhaps to consider, let us know. This is your conversation with the employee. But this is the one that we see as the best situation at the moment. Give them time to have a think about it. Obviously, don't ask for an answer on the spot. Give them time to talk to their family or whatever, and then come back and say, well, hopefully you can reach an agreement on that. And then again, it's really important that that's reduced to writing. It can be an email reply, that sort of thing. But also, so they understand, when things get better, we're going to put you back up to your ordinary salary. This is not a permanent thing.
And when you are talking to your team, one of the things you said about is to get them involved in the conversation. Would you go in with a plan, with a decision made, or would you just kind of like sit them all down together and say, these are options, we need to consider all of them, and can we brainstorm any ideas? So one of the things you said is get your staff involved. How do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's important for staff. I mean, staff always want to be part of the process, right? They want to be communicated to and feel like they're part of the decision-making process. And I think that's important anyway, regardless of what you might want to sort of get across. And so, yes, I think having the employees say, look, these are the options, ultimately we're the ultimate decision maker, the employer, but this is what we could see as our options. Have you got any other options available that you think might be useful for the business and useful for you? And so getting them to sort of come back to you and say, look, what do you think? What would you like to see happen with both you and perhaps ideas around the whole company? Then I think that's it's almost a team building exercise in dire times, but it's something where you're getting the buy-in of those employees. They feel like they're part of the process, and I think most employees will realise, well, it's a little bit out of our control. That's the whole thing about being an employee. But if they feel like they've got some input into it, I guess, then it might make the process a bit easier.
Another question that I have about when you're looking at these different options, reduction of hours, possibly a reduction of pay as well, are you allowed to make different decisions for different people or different decisions for people in different departments? Because I'm guessing right now there may be certain people in certain departments that you need a lot less of, but you would probably need to keep all of your salespeople to be bringing in revenue to the business. Can you ask this person to work full-time and this person to work 2 days, but they might be sitting next to each other but doing different roles? Is that possible?
No, it's a good question, and it's one that we're getting a lot of questions about as well. And so you don't need to treat everybody the same. I guess that's the bottom line. That is, the CFO of the company may be more needed than the sales manager. And so you don't need to say, well, everybody's going back to 3 days a week or anything like that, or that's proposal. I think where it comes to a department, for example, where you've got a bunch of account managers, in a business, and let's say there's 10 account managers and you've worked out that you really only need the equivalent of about 5 of them, that's where I think you go to them as a group and say, look, there's a number of options. We can make some people redundant or stand some people down perhaps, but what we prefer to see is you all go back to 3 days a week, or however the maths works out. And not as a group decision. They all need to make their own decisions, but hopefully that's getting everyone's, not everybody needs to be treated the same. You're entitled to make decisions about redundancies based on various factors that we don't have time to get into, but the bottom line is, where there is a group and a department, it's wise to treat them, give each person the opportunity. And that would be the best result, where everybody agrees to reduce their hours temporarily so that nobody loses their job.
Okay.
But I should stress, the employees there's no requirement that they agree to that sort of proposal, and if they don't, then you've got other options available to you which are probably not as great as the ones we've just discussed.
And we know that the stand down could be something that could be enforced, but we mentioned the reduction of hours or reduction of pay has to be agreed. So what happens if the staff member says, look, I got a mortgage to pay, sorry, but I'm working full time and I would not accept a pay cut in any shape or form.
So that's where you then are kind of forced into a situation where if the stand down does apply to your business and you can achieve those boxes that we discussed previously, then you can say to that employee, well, I'm sorry, we'd prefer that you take some annual leave, or we prefer that you reduce your hours, but if you're not going to agree to that, that's fine, but we're going to have to stand you down, or we're going to have to make you redundant.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about redundancy, and then we'll sort of wrap this up. That obviously is a last resort, but it has to be something that many people will have to consider. And so, what are the rules in terms of? And I know that if you've got less than 15 staff, there's certain conditions. If you've got more than 15 staff, it's different. So, just can you give us like a 1 minute summary of the redundancy laws?
Okay, 1 minute. So basically, the concept of redundancy is it's about the role, not the person. So you can't necessarily choose people because they're lesser performers. It's basically, if you've got a group of people and you need to make some redundant, then you need to make sure that you're being fair in terms of the decision-making process. Performance might be one of them, but it can't be the sole purpose. But the idea is that you consult with your employees and say, well, look, we've been through all these other options. Unfortunately, we can't, because of the downturn in business, we can't continue to keep a certain number of roles or any of the roles. And so we are consulting with you, and it's really important that you get the process right. I see a lot of unfair dismissal claims brought because people didn't go through the process. And so you need to consult. And there's sort of a 2-step process. You consult, and you're basically saying, look, it's looking like the roles are no longer going to be there. We're consulting with you as to whether there are other roles for redeployment. You have to look at redeployment within the business. Now, in this climate, it's unlikely you're going to be able to do that, but you need to look at that option. And then if you can't, the next step is another meeting where you terminate the employee. And then you've got severance, as you said, less than 15 employees. There's no requirement to pay severance. You still do need to pay notice and annual leave and all those things. Also, if they've been there less than 1 year, you don't have to pay severance either. So the severance is that extra redundancy bit that employees would get.
Okay, so obviously it is a complicated process, and you probably should get some advice. I know right now there's a whole bunch of checklists and articles flowing around the internet, which is somewhat helpful, but it also could be potentially wrong or misleading as well, or come from another jurisdiction. So how do people get more information from you or another professional in order to work out what they should do? Would you recommend coming to you with a blank canvas, or would you recommend coming to someone, a professional with a plan, and then get consultation?
I think, and initially, and I'm very happy to offer this to the viewers, is give Bland's Law a call. We'll be able to chat through with you in 10, 15 minutes, an idea, sort of things we've talked about today, and then just to give people an idea of what options are available to them, because some won't be available depending on the business that they have. And so once we sort of have that high level discussion, I think you're going to need to get some specific advice from there, and that's where we can work with people to do that. So certainly you want to, I think, have a chat with someone, whether it's us or someone else, that says, okay, this is our situation, because it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's some of the problem with some of the stuff that's on the internet, is that they say, well, Qantas did this, so I can do it. And that's not necessarily the case. And so you do need to get specifics about your own business, and we're very happy to have a chat on a high level basis, and then sort of give you some ideas, and then try and help you execute it if you need to.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your time and all of the advice that you've shared. Thank you so much. And if you want to get in touch, then of course you could Google Bland's Law, and you'll be able to find them there. Otherwise, there's lots of awesome professionals out there. And just very quickly, do you service clients nationally? And are the rules the same? I know we've got some friends from New Zealand as well, and other parts of the world where the laws are going to be slightly different as well. But I'm guessing a lot of the core principles are going to apply, but the specifics around redundancies, for example, is going to be something you have to check with your with whatever country you actually live in. But can you service clients Australia-wide?
All clients Australia-wide, and also industry-wide. So all industries, all businesses throughout Australia, and indeed New Zealand as well. We advise businesses in New Zealand. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Perth or Cairns or Hobart, the advice will be the same.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Andrew.
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
High
Dale.
five. Thank you so much. We actually do have a couple of questions, if it's okay. So I believe Andy is standing by at the back. We've had a few come in the comments, so we might do one or two questions, and then we'll wrap. Go for it, Andy.
All right. So, hi, everyone. Got a couple of questions come through. First one is from Julie Stones. How does each different option with standing down or reduced pay affect employees' access to Centrelink benefits?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is. Well, if you're earning an income, and you're going to, I'm not an expert on the Centrelink payments, but there's a lot of information that's available. But essentially, where you are not earning the same salary, you may be able to get that supplement, depending on how much of the salary you're earning. Also, if you're stood down, I mean, Josh Frydenberg has come out and said, well, those that are stood down may also be eligible. So I suppose the answer is have a look to see. It'll depend on your own circumstances, but it's certainly open to you where you've had a reduction of pay or you're on stand down. So it's not just necessarily for those that have lost their jobs.
Okay. Just want to check, Andy, is there any more questions?
Yeah, sure are. We've got a good one. If you have employees, a couple of people have actually asked this. If they're on a student visa or on a working holiday, how does that affect what sort of rights and do they have, and what obligations do you have as an employer?
The obligations won't change for the whether people are on a visa or otherwise. I mean, the same options are available to employers who employ people on visas as opposed to people that aren't employed on visas. I should say just in relation, just very quickly, also have a look at what the government is giving in terms of small business. So businesses with less than 50 million turnover are able to, for cash flow issues, access their withholding tax on employees. So if you pay $10,000 in withholding tax, you'll be able to get a credit for that from the. So that's the incentive is to keep people employed, and so you'll be able to get a credit up to a cap of $50,000 for the first 6 months, and then another 50 after that. So have a look at that. Speak to your accountant, but certainly that is an incentive for small business and medium-sized businesses to keep their staff. They'll get some assistance from the government from the employer perspective as well.
Okay, Andy, any more?
Yeah, there's
Let's do one more. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully this is a nice quick one from Frank Selim. If my staff receive a car allowance and they're going to work from home, can I remove this allowance? And do I need their agreement to do so?
You might want to get in touch with me, Frank. That's a longer answer than we have. But depending on how you've set up your car allowance, whether it's extra or part of your overall package will depend on the answer to that. I know a lot of lawyers say it depends, but certainly that is one where you'll probably want to get some specific advice. So I'm sorry I can't answer that in this forum.
All right.
Completely.
Thank you so much. We are going to have to wrap right now. Can you all please give a huge round of applause to Andrew Bland? Thank you so much. Andrew, appreciate it. Thank you. Wonderful, great job, and thank you to you for allowing us to cover this really important subject. It's one of those things that no one likes to really talk about, but it's essential to making sure we know what our options are if and when we need to use them.